Okay, let's see if it's running. I hate how I have to wait to see if it's working. Okay. Hello, and welcome to Ask the Right Questions. I am Slim Jim, and over there is Race the Raposa. But today
What's up?
he's Race the Revelator because of the
Yes, I
question.
am actually.
So how have you been doing, Race?
Ever since I quit my job, I'm doing amazing.
Oh, amazing!
So,
First time Race has
yeah.
said that about his life, at least in quite a long time.
Yeah, yeah.
So what have you been accomplishing?
Just getting my artwork up, um, preparing to live stream. No more excuses. I'm gonna do it next week, Monday. It's gonna be my first stream. I'm committing to doing it, getting over the anxiety and just doing it.
You'll be
So,
streaming soon.
yep.
I'll be launching my world building project Higher Falls by the end of February.
Oh yeah, that's right.
I am almost done with the first draft of the second story arc. The main part's all done. I'm in the last couple scenes now
All right.
of the second story arc. Then I'll edit the first one while I let that one sit before I come back to it to edit it. So we'll get into the question. What is
Yep.
Christian apologetics? So why did you choose this race?
Well, I think you chose it last week.
I chose it for you then because we ended up talking about it a lot.
Yes,
Well,
that's
you've also done it as
yes, we
long
did.
as I've known you, almost as long as
Yes.
I've known you. It was like just after high school.
Hmm.
You got into it really deep.
Yeah. So I guess it's kind of like my testimony of how I became a Christian has kind of worked into it too, because I've I grew up in a Christian household. Um, my parents always raised me as one. Um, I went to church most of my life. There was a time in like junior high where I wasn't going. And there's a lot of teen angst, obviously, that everybody gets around that age. It wasn't that important to me then, and I was just trying to fit in more. So, um, was my audio not working?
Your audio is working. I think you should pause Twitch because as soon as you opened it, your video got choppy.
Okay, then I'm well. Okay, is it good now?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay,
I'll
all
let
right.
you know.
So I guess you'll just have to pull up the things for me without me seeing it
Yeah,
then.
you can just tell me. It's fine.
Okay,
I got the three things open.
okay. Um, so then in high school, I kind of it became a little more important to me. I went back to church. Um, I still don't really know a lot. Um, but it got to the point where I had Christian television on, and one night before I was going to sleep, and I just had the TV on. I saw this guy who was answering questions from college students, like really tough questions. He was this Indian guy named Ravi Zacharias, and um, I was just like, I didn't know that was happening. I didn't know that existed. I didn't know Christians were actually going out to places that weren't church and trying to answer people's questions. Um, and you're in high school. I was already thinking about going to college, so I knew I would be like going there to be um, challenged by ideas and all that. So it's like, wow. Well, if he has the confidence to go and answer questions from like intellectual college students, then well, there must be really something to this. And it, it, I always describe it as like there was a war going on and I didn't know it. And um, so I looked him up and I just watched every YouTube video I could. There wasn't a lot. back then of Ravi's stuff, but he did have a podcast um, on his website, and that's one of the links I sent. It's rzim.com, and it was Let My People Think and Just Thinking were the names of the podcast. And so for like a whole summer after I left high school, I was like just devouring those. Um, I listened to as much as I could, and I never thought the same way after that. I got into it. It got me into philosophy. It got me into debate. It got me into science. I found that's another link I forgot. I found a Christian International Ministries (CMI), and that was like that was the stuff on there was mind blowing to me. It's going into science to get arguments for the Bible being actual history. And so I've just ever since I've been reading and listening to as much as I could, um, getting all my questions answered because I had a lot of questions for my parents. And I had a lot of questions that I never even thought of asking my pastors. And they just never really had robust answers for me. And I think that's the experience of most people going to church is that um, nobody knows how to answer your questions. And
Yeah.
a lot of them are perfectly reasonable and legitimate questions.
Church has unfortunately become the mostly feel-good topics.
It's like I'm always surprised when I hear about a non-Christian or a non-believer going to church. They say they go for the community. To be honest, I find church kind of boring. I find I'm not interested in the worship music. I like listening to the sermon, but I don't like every speaking style that I hear. And
Well,
it's just
that's
like
a
announcements about the community. I've always gone to Pentecostal church, to like American Pentecostal church in New England. So I don't know if that has a certain style to it that I just don't like. But I haven't been to a lot of different kinds of churches, so maybe I'm just like limited in my scope. But it's just really weird to hear about non-believers like enjoying going to church, um, especially Catholic church, where there's so many different like rituals you have to learn. So I think it's become like a social club, and it's pretty important to a society to have something that unites people, and it also teaches like morality. And I think most people want to be good, so they kind of just see religion as like a social club where you learn about morality. But Christianity and the Bible actually being true, we don't go that far. And I think most people who call themselves Christians, they benefit from all that moral teaching and they benefit from being with other believers and stuff. But I think if you ask 90% of them, they really don't know how to answer like some of the deepest questions. And I've never been satisfied with just, I don't know, going with the flow. I've never really fit in at church. I never fit in at youth group.
well, what is it like 80% of Christians haven't even read the Bible?
I'm sure.
That's a
I don't.
statistic I heard.
Yeah, I mean,
See if I
I'm
can pull
sure
it up.
people haven't read the Bible in its entirety. Admittedly, I haven't read it completely in its entirety, mostly because I want to like study it. I want to make sure if I read something, I'm understanding it as well as I can.
I did read it. On the toilet over 2 years. I read both of them.
Okay, that's a great accomplishment.
Hey, well,
Um,
most haven't.
so I think what people do is they start in Genesis and then and then they give up at Leviticus because it's just listing tons and tons of rules that
Well,
aren't
well, the one
relevant
I
to them.
found was 80% don't read the Bible daily, which, I mean, after you read it, you've read it,
Yeah.
unless you're going back for reference.
No, there's a lot to study in there, and it tells you to study it. So, which isn't, I mean, that's something that I guess Christians aren't holding each other accountable to, is actually studying the Bible and like
Um,
really understanding it.
did the churches you go to read read a passage each time?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Well, because
Yeah.
I know when I was in Catholic school, they said over the course of 3 to 4 years, if you went to church every Sunday, you will have read the whole Bible.
Oh, maybe.
That was
I don't know.
that was the idea behind it.
Oh, okay.
It's a pretty good idea.
Yeah.
It's a way to do
Well,
it, I guess. It's
I think most churches go by topical teaching. So they take an issue that we're dealing with now, or an issue about human nature, and like, okay, what does the Bible say about it? So you only go to those verses that talk about that. But there really are no verses in the Bible. They're all self-contained works with no breaks in them, and they all have to be taken into context.
well, yeah, because it's story after story.
Yeah, and well, and there's also poems and
If you think
history
about it,
books.
well, the way I thought about it was short stories, and I actually got through it easier rather than just looking at a big thick book and being
Yeah,
intimidated.
they're also kind of like open letters from people um, claiming to talk on God's behalf, and they're open letters to a certain group of people at a certain time. So you also have to know the historical context of the book to like really fully get it. Like you can take stuff that's relevant to you now, but you also got to understand it back then, what it was trying to say. And there's a lot of misunderstandings that come from people applying stuff from the Bible that was meant for back then to today, and it kind of contradicts itself. It doesn't always work out. So there's misconceptions that believers and non-believers have about a lot of things that are in there. There's things I used to believe that it's like I can't believe I even saw that in the text. Um, and your understanding of it is always evolving as you read more and more. But it's a book where things everything connects. Um, so, anyways, Christian apologetics is a word. Apologia is a Greek word meaning in defense of. Um, and most people haven't even heard of the word apologetics.
No, I hadn't until you told me about it.
Yeah, and it's people always say it sounds like you're apologizing for something. Um, but what it really is, it's just this arguing that the Bible is true.
Well,
And
well, if you're being apologetic, you are typically defending something to a certain degree. If you
yeah,
think about it that way.
I think that's where the word
So,
comes
so
from. Is how
the
it's used.
word is in English. You just never hear it used that way.
Right, right. Now crossexamined.com or .org, which is done by the apologist Frank Turek. Um, he's a really great Christian apologist. People can look up his videos, and we'll have all the links in the description and all that. But in their website, they kind of describe it in two ways, which I thought was pretty cool. Um, Christian apologetics is both the science and art of answering uh, the question of whether Christianity is true by using reason and evidence. And it's they also say it can be summarized in two parts: objective reasons and evidence that Christianity is true. It corresponds to reality, and the communication of that truth to the world. So it's not just about knowing the answers and thinking about the answers and asking good questions. It's also how do you communicate to that to people? How can you be persuasive? How can you meet people where they are? Like how can you convince them that it's true? And that's a lot harder. I don't think a lot of Christians understand persuasion and like how to really grab somebody and move their mind along to reach the conclusion you want them to get to. Um, the Bible verses that talk about that, um, the verse that we always use for Christian apologetics is always be ready to give a logical defense to anyone who asks you to account for the hope and confident assurance elicited by faith that is within you. Yet do it with gentleness and respect. Um, and I'm using the amplified version, if anybody's wondering, because it says give a logical defense, and elicited by faith is added in there. Um, and it says do it with gentleness and respect. So that's another thing that you want to keep in mind. Like, people aren't going to listen to you if you're yelling at them. And maybe a lot of unbelievers listening to this now have had a Christian just like get in their face or make them feel bad and
Well,
not really show love.
you also can't simply use the Bible to argue to people outside the church.
Yeah, that's true.
You need to use real world examples too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you got to know a lot about the culture that we're in. You got to know a lot about them and what they know and how you can make it relevant, how you can communicate with them. And if you don't do it without love, then of course they're not going to listen to you. And there are a lot of just kind of ignorant and self-righteous Christians out there who make everybody look bad and turn people off from even wanting to know the answer. So Colossians 4:6, it says, "Let your speech at all times be gracious and pleasant, seasoned with salt, so that you will know how to answer each one who questions you." So again, that's like Paul says, "Be all things to all men." Like Paul was the Apostle Paul was he went to school in Greece. Or no, he knew Greek. He went to school in Rome, and he was Jewish. So I mean, he was like training to be a Pharisee to like study the Bible and know everything about it, or study the Old Testament, know everything about it. So Paul was perfectly positioned to communicate to all three cultures at the time. So I guess that's kind of answers it right away. One thing I wanted to add was this this verse. This will be the last verse for anybody wondering. This is Paul talking in. Oh, I didn't write down the verse. Well, anyways, we'll put it in the description later. Paul is saying he's writing a letter to a church, and he says, "Now, if Christ is preached as raised from the dead, how is it that some among you say that there is no resurrection of the dead? But if there is no resurrection of the dead, then not even Christ has been raised. And if Christ has not been raised, then our preaching is in vain." And the Amplified version adds useless, amounting to nothing. And then it says, "Your faith is also in vain, imaginary, unfounded, devoid of value and benefit, not based on truth." So he goes on to say, if Christ has not been raised, your faith is worthless and powerless, mere delusion. If you are in your sins and under the control and penalty of sin, then those also who have fallen asleep in Christ are lost. If we who are abiding in Christ have hoped only in his life, and this is all there is, then we are, of all people, most miserable and to be pitied. But now, as things really are, Christ has in fact been raised from the dead, and he became the first fruits. That is, the first to be resurrected with an incorruptible, immortal body, foreshadowing the resurrection of those who have fallen asleep in death. People like to say, or people want to say, that the Bible is just kind of true in a spiritual sense and is true symbolically. There's a lot of symbols in the Bible, and there's a lot of spirituality in the Bible. But that entire verse there is saying, if the historical fact that Jesus didn't rise from the dead is false, then we're all liars, and you should just feel bad for us. We're not telling the truth. The truth is based on a fact, on an actual historical event. So I don't think a lot of people know verses like that, where it's actually talking about like a physical thing that happened. And Jesus had a physical body, not a spiritual one. So that's something you can investigate. That's something you can look into. Paul is telling you to look into it, and the answers are out there. I was able to find the answers. I guess it depends on whether you're motivated to or not. If you just don't care, then there's not much this video can do for you.
What the people
But
don't care? Did they make it this far?
no, probably not. But it's just, I wanted to make the video to put it out there for people. That if you've had a lot of questions that didn't get answered, the answers are out there. It's just, and they're free. And it's just about how much you care about what is true. So that's me answering the question, what is Christian apologetics?
And you also have a link on Cross-Examined.
Cross-Examined is one website. You can go to that one and read that whole thing. That it goes through some of the arguments for God's existence and then arguments for the resurrection of Christ. And then you can go to RZIM, Ravi Zacharias International Ministries. You can listen to the podcast there. Read the descriptions, whatever is like relevant to you, whatever you want to know. And then reasonablefaith.org. You can go to that website. You can listen to podcasts on there. You can also go to their YouTube channel and watch all of William Lane Craig is the Christian apologist there. You can listen to his debates with atheists. You can listen to the Bible studies that he does at his church. They talk about all the different doctrines. So you can, if you want to understand more about Christianity, he mixes apologetics with the Bible verses. And then, I mean, you can, he has podcasts as well, but you can also like go watch these. If I was to suggest anybody go anywhere to know more about this, it would be the animated videos on reasonablefaith.com. Just there's like 11 videos there. If you're interested, go watch those. They go through all the best arguments for God's existence and the historicity of the resurrection. And again, when it's like comparing the New Testament to other writings at the time in ancient history, when you go to historians and scholars and ask them, how do we know something is true? How can we be confident that a fact from ancient history is true? The New Testament passes all those tests with flying colors. Yet it's the most doubted document there is. So there's just a lot of things you may not know. There's a lot of evidence you may not be aware of. And then Christian CMI, Christian Ministries International, they give some of the scientific arguments for the Old Testament. That's the young Earth creationist view. Not every Christian has that view, but you can go there and read some of their stuff if you want. That's not a, we call it a salvation issue. It's not, you won't be saved whether you believe the earth is young or old. You're saved based on whether you believe Jesus rose from the dead. But I think it solidifies the Old Testament as being true. I think a flood did happen. I think there's evidence for that flood happening. Jesus believed that it was true, the Old Testament. So there's a lot to get into. There's a lot of there's just mountains of information that I'm dedicated to getting through it, and I even haven't got through a lot of it. So it's something I'm like super passionate about. I want everybody to have at least a little bit of interest in it, or at least be curious about it a little bit. James has listened to my passion about it for years.
I've
Had
listened.
long debates.
We've had long
About,
debates over the years. I've listened to a good amount of it, I would like to say. I think
yeah.
even you could say that.
Yep. Definitely.
Um, but Aris, have you did you listen to the Symbolic World podcast yet
I
at
did
all?
not yet. No, I
No.
didn't. No.
I guess that could be more advanced stuff you could say if
Yeah.
if you already. But I stumbled upon it just because I started researching symbolism for my world building and writing project.
Hmm.
So I stumbled upon the Symbolic World website and its podcast quite early. But I listened to that. They mostly do talk about the Bible, but they go into some fictional works, fairy tales, that kind of stuff too, and how
Hmm.
symbolism was integrated into them. But I think it does a lot. If you listen to it, it does a lot to help you understand the thinking of the past and how the Bible was written to be timeless and how it's full of symbolism, and the symbolism helps it do that.
Right.
Because a symbol thousands of years ago means the same thing as now.
Yeah. I mean, when I read a lot of like Greek mythology, there's a lot of things in there that to me right now are super random.
Yeah.
Like there's just details that why that animal, why did he do that? Why, and it seems like I don't really have any examples, but like it seems like for that day and that time, those things all had a specific meaning, and that adds layers to the story. And so a lot of things that Jesus says is in a Jewish context. It's you have to know a good amount of Jewish culture and Jewish symbolism to get the full impact of what he's saying. Uh, like Jesus dying on a cross, he's dying on wood, which is made from trees. In the Jewish culture, to die on a tree was to be cursed. So for them, the symbolism was wood, tree, cursed. And so Jesus dying on a cross was saying that he was cursed. And to the Jewish people, that was like, well, how he can't be the king of the Jews if he's cursed. And so there's a lot of stuff like that where something you thought was just random and didn't make sense to you, it made sense to people back then. And hopefully, even if you don't exactly move to, okay, this is true, or move to those arguments, we can at least appreciate it on that level as like a symbolic story and try to imagine what it was like back then.
Well, the most basic example is the snake in the Garden of Eden. Snakes, or rather reptiles all over the world have represented being sneaky or cunning
Hmm.
for ages all over the world. They also can be seen as wise. But I mean, I guess, the snake wasn't stupid in the Garden of Eden, right? He wasn't stupid,
Yeah.
so. But
Yeah, I mean, well, they're
that's the most basic
predators.
classic one.
yeah, they're very slow and methodical
Well,
predators.
but that's also why fairy tales and Greek tragedies have survived the ages too,
Hmm.
because of all the symbolism.
Yeah,
So you could argue that was so. I mean, so it was built into the Bible to make it timeless,
yeah,
and it helps to understand it because
yeah,
in our blip in time, coming into civilization. I mean, it's only past 100 years we've gotten this very scientific mind. You know what I mean?
hmm,
That everything is based around just pure reason and wanting and wanting evidence for everything. You know what I mean?
yeah,
And,
yeah.
and absolutely demanding evidence and facts and reason for absolutely everything in the world.
And it's not bad. It's led to a lot of good.
No, it's not bad,
Uh,
but it
it's
causes
just not.
a very different mindset. It's a gigantic cultural shift.
Yeah, it is. I mean, most of humanity hasn't thought that way for
Go back even a couple hundred
thousands of
years,
years.
you look at a mountain and it's like, gee, I wonder what's over that mountain. Could it be giants? Who knows what's over that mountain, right? You don't know.
Right, right. Yeah, yeah. It's like it can lead to a lot of falsehoods if you don't test something. And I guess people, I'm sure people are thinking a lot about like science. Um, when it comes to like, how do I explain this? People mean two things when they say the word science. They mean the knowledge that we have from scientific experiments and things that scientists say, and then science as an actual method of gaining knowledge. And the two don't always correlate. There's a lot of things in modern day science that are based off assumptions about the past that don't have direct observational evidence behind them. And I think a lot of people get confused and kind of deceived by it. Uh, we can't examine, we can't observe the past, we can't test it, and we can't repeat it to see if it's like an actual scientific law that's like in the universe, an actual thing that happens all the time. Like science is trying to find the mechanics of the physical world, but it doesn't answer moral questions, it doesn't answer philosophical questions, and not everything that scientists say is true. Things change over time. What could be the scientific consensus could be completely different years from now or a day from now. Discoveries can be made where things can change in an instant. Um, so people put a lot of stock in um, everything that scientists say. I kind of like think of them as the high priest of secular society. You know,
Well,
it's just
people
like,
have to look
oh,
up to
it's
something.
science, so it's true. What you said is true because it's science. But science is not the only way to gain knowledge. Uh, and it's great, obviously. It's needed. It's done a lot of good for us. And the answers are usually concrete, like when an experiment is tested over and over again and the same thing happens, you can be sure that that's a discovery, a new scientific law. Like you can trust in that theory. But I would say a lot of the objections to the Bible based on science, if you like really examine them, you won't see a lot of like examples of. You'll see too many examples of assumptions and not like direct um, observational evidence.
You could also look at it as if you write with symbols, you're also trimming a lot of the fat out of out of the story. Storytelling. You're trimming a lot of
Hmm.
the fat out, and it does make it more universal because if you take the snake and replace it with a dragon or a lizard, does it make a difference in terms of the story?
Um, it doesn't change what Satan did through the
Yeah,
animal,
exactly. That's what I mean.
so
Our,
yeah,
yeah, exactly. That's my point. You could,
yeah.
you could take, you can, it trims out the fat. It makes it easier to translate.
Well, you got to understand, people didn't understand a lot back then. They understood visuals, they understood symbols and visual things above everything else.
Exactly.
Philosophy gets super, what's the word? Too dense and complex. Going through logical arguments can be a headache, or complicated ones, I mean.
Or like they say that David killed Goliath with a sling. Did it make a difference if he was in a modern day and used a gun?
Oh, yeah, yeah,
Exactly. That's what I mean. You can change everything out and it makes it timeless.
yeah, yeah. Um, I would say if anybody's listened to Jordan Peterson, his lectures on the Bible, apologetics is like the step up understanding of Jordan Peterson,
Yeah.
if that catches anybody's ear.
He takes it and says he takes it and makes it he's saying that it's symbolism, but it's nothing more.
Hmm.
He's almost making it sound like symbolism is a bad thing. Um, anyway, the website is thesymbolicworld.com. I probably would say this is probably more advanced stuff. It's a more advanced step of
Yeah.
understanding it of the Bible or just symbolism in general. They have the podcast. They have articles on there. They have a recommended reading list. I am working my way through the recommended reading list for understanding symbolism currently.
Yeah. Well, Jordan Peterson is going through the psychologists uh, and
Jordan Jordan
archetypes.
Peterson's been on the podcast multiple times.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So he's going through it with, he's basically the gist of what Jordan Peterson says with the Bible is that it's a story about our evolution. That the the proto humans or whatever you want to, the Neanderthals, to them snakes were like predators, and that's why the snake is a predator in the Genesis story, because in our evolution we we use this, like, the snake is deceiving, the snake is a predator because it was predators for us when we were hunter gatherers and all that. So it's not really saying that the Bible is true. It's saying it's true in a different way. It's saying it's true through the naturalistic evolutionary worldview. Um,
Well, he's kind of like saying it's true to our past or our feelings in the past, so, along that lines.
it's like something that our genetics came up with, and it's a reflection of our evolutionary past. The problem is he doesn't always make that clear when he's talking, and he'll talk about God, but he's not really meaning an actual being sometimes, like, and that verse, that's why I gave that verse from Paul, where Paul's saying if Jesus didn't rise from the dead with a physical body, if that didn't happen, then everything we say is useless, or pity us. Like, we mean nothing to this world if that historical fact isn't true. And when Jordan Peterson is really pressed on it, he says, no, I'm agnostic about whether Jesus actually rose from the dead. So it's like, it's great that he's getting people interested in the Bible, and I love his stuff. I still love what he's doing for people psychologically and socially, especially for men. He's doing a lot of
Yeah.
great stuff, and he's doing a lot of great stuff in the culture war that we're having right now. Um, but I would say if you want to go beyond that, you go to people like William Lane Craig, you go to Ravi Zacharias, you go to all the apologists in there. Like, there's a lot of great Michael McAllister. Um, there's a lot of, like, really great apologists in that website too. There's a lot for people to go through. It's just about whether they're motivated or have the time to do it. You know. Um, Trying to think of what else to add to this.
Jordan Peterson's the agnostic. view on symbolism. The people on the symbolic world are Christians, so you can get both sides. And Jordan Peterson has been on it multiple times. The guy is friends with them,
Yeah.
so
Um, I'll just add one more thing. So this this whole thing with there's confusion with the word science sometimes. There's also confusion with the word literal. It's like, do you take the Bible literal? No, not exactly. I take the Bible as it's written. So the Bible is a collection of books. It's a collection of historical or it's a collection of documents. Some of those books are history. Some of those books are wisdom, like fortune cookies or something. Some of those books are poems, just all poetry. Some of them are just phrases, a big collection of phrases. Um, some of them, like Job, they might just be stories. But a lot of them are written as historical documents. Um, while there is symbolic stuff that I think God did that you can find in there and stuff that's relevant to the culture at the time that adds layers of meaning to it, it's written as if it actually happened. Genesis is a history book. It's written as if it happened. And Exodus are written as if they actually happened. And the New Testament, all the Gospels are four different accounts, and they're written like they happen. There is not a lot of language that in Mark, Matthew, and Luke. There's not a lot of flowery language. There's not a lot of embellishment. It's just like Jesus is a person of action. He goes here, he said this, he did this. Then he goes here, then he says this. Then his disciples do this. Then he says that. Um, it doesn't have the features of a um, it doesn't have the features of like a fictitious story. So uh, that's the question of like, do you take the Bible literal? It's like I take it as it's written, and sometimes I think that the parts in Genesis that disagree with modern day science, people desperately want those things to just be symbolic. Even a lot of Christian apologists take that view that because Genesis is so um, I don't want to use the word antithetical or so contradictory to the modern day view of like evolution and long ages of the earth.
there's definitely a thing where people want evolution to be true really bad.
Yeah, they want evolution to be true, and if the Bible disagrees with that, they want that part of the Bible to be symbolic and spiritual, and the other parts are history. Like, but again, if you go into like the genealogies, like in Genesis, they list, okay, this is the father of this person, and this is his son, and then he became a father to this person, and that's his son, and if you do a lot of the math, it just doesn't work out that there's like millions of years in between. Um, so I mean, there's a lot of arguments to go through in there, um, but yeah, take books of the Bible as they're written. If it's poetry, then you take it as poetry, and you have a little more freedom in how you can interpret those things. They can be maybe more um, layers of meaning to just okay, Jesus did this. There's no reason for me to spiritualize Jesus going to a town like it says that Jesus went to a town. You know?
Well, there's nothing to argue about there.
Yeah, well, people like to cherry pick though. There's a lot of ignorance and there's a lot of cherry picking and a lot of misunderstanding. And to sift through it all is pretty tough. There's a lot of different theologians with a lot of different understandings of scripture. There's people who study it their whole lives and can still be wrong about something in there. So I guess I'm kind of repeating myself from at this point. Um, I just hope it gets somebody interested in looking into it because even if you don't want to like, even if you don't think you'll ever become a Christian, it's good to at least know about Western history and know about why people believe what they believe, and you can engage with it. And it's always interesting to look at philosophy itself. All of philosophy that isn't theology, that isn't religion, that's all still really valuable and interesting stuff that can add to your life. So you should still just learn philosophy and logic and debating in general, even if it doesn't have to do with Christian apologetics. So,
Okay.
do you have anything else to add?
I think I added in what I wanted to add, which was the symbolic stuff,
Okay.
symbolic thinking.
James is really hard to convince of Christianity, but he's also been like my training wheels for talking to people. So,
What about all your great Facebook debates, Race, that you had when you first get into it?
I one time I went to an atheist forum and got like the I don't want to say they destroyed me, but they were not happy with me. I had to learn about tone, and I had to learn way better arguments than the ones I was giving.
Well,
Um, it was kind of stressing me out for a few days debating with them on a forum, and I kind of didn't do it again because it wasn't like they're the kind of like overzealous religious atheists.
um,
I don't think there's a big percentage of them in the world, but
well, a lot of times you end up running in circles if you just go around debating people on the internet because of the same arguments.
yeah.
At least when you argued me, it was new stuff.
Well, they don't have like a receptive, open-minded attitude. A lot of them, I feel. So a lot of times you can't. You're gonna waste your time and energy on some people because they're just like determined not to believe. So you gotta like pick your battles.
All right, so that answers the question of what is Christian apologetics, I
Yes.
think. Not something you hear about.
No.
Never really thought about it. I didn't. Nobody heard about it until we were talking about last week on air.
Well, there's a lot of like political discussions going on, and they don't even mention it. I mean, you can listen to Ben Shapiro, Jordan Peterson talk for many hours, and they never mention apologetics. So people are getting into more important questions of about society and our culture, anyways.
So maybe they'll
So
get there.
yeah, and I don't think if I didn't watch Ravi on that um, TV that night, not only would I not be a Christian, but I we probably wouldn't be doing this show because just my interest in apologetics got me into like philosophy and debating and discussing things with people. Like I would have never tried to talk to you about Christianity or try to convince you of anything because I just wouldn't have been motivated. Uh,
Yeah, it wouldn't have been super important.
yeah.
Although
So ask
you
the
were
right question.
preaching.
Exists
You were preaching to me back in school though, before it.
a little bit, but it when I found when it's like when somebody came to me and was like, hey, this is like here's some like intellectual reasons why this is actually true. We started to learn those and be convinced by those. Then it was like a life mission,
Well, it gives you
you
more to
know?
think about than just have you heard about Jesus?
Right. Right. I mean, I've tried to go on a college campus and do that to people, and it's kind of just like
Everybody's
I don't
heard
think it
about
works that well.
Jesus, but have you heard about the rest of the story?
Yeah. Has anyone actually tried to convince you that it's actually true? And you got to believe that truth exists before you even get into it too. But
So it's always a
I
silly
guess that's
question to me, does truth exist?
I guess that's for another episode.
Yeah. Well, like next week's episode, does truth exist? Well,
It's a
maybe, well,
it's a
well, maybe
contradicting
not.
question.
Well, maybe not next week, but
Yeah, at
well,
some point.
at some point when we feel like contradicting ourselves.
Well, you know, one more. I'll just give one more caveat to this. So Ravi Zacharias would always talk about postmodernism, whether truth exists or not. I would learn a lot of those arguments. Then I talked to listened to William Lane Craig, and he said postmodernism is pretty bad, and a lot of people believe it, but a lot of people are still very modern. Like they still believe in evidence uh, and still have a lot of objections to Christianity that people in the 50s, that intellectuals in the 50s had. So they're still very modern. So we want to get to them on that level. But I think of the year as the years have gone by, our culture's become completely postmodern to people don't even know what gender they are. And I think the political left is completely postmodern. So Ravi was right to like drive that into people that truth exists, because I think now it's just like part of American politics is not believing that truth exists. You know, I think,
Yeah,
and when it comes to like fake news and stuff, it's like, oh, this is a post-truth world, which means that now the news isn't out to just, it's not there now just to give you the facts. It's there to twist them and give a bias and give an opinion and manipulate you. So that question of whether truth exists is even more important now than ever.
which that'll be an introduction to whenever that show happens.
Yeah, that's the end of this episode is an introduction to another.
All right. So we'll wrap it up here.
Yeah,
All
yeah.
right. Well, thank you for joining us. We stream Thursday nights Eastern Standard Time. Uh, today was an hour late, so I don't want to say it's at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.
Well, yeah, we usually try to make it by then.
But Race had some personal issues.
Put me on blast.
Put you on blast. I don't know what's a big deal. Something happened to me one week.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Right.
Okay.
So we'll see you next time on Dragon Ball Z.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.